Hey guys, this is Austin Characters and Controllers Gaming. I am here today with Josh Frederick. He is currently a student up at University of Wisconsin Stout up in Menominee, Wisconsin. Hello, Josh.
Hello there.
So, uh, about your whole process, take me kind of like to the beginning of when you first came to the realization you wanted to create video game artwork.
I want to say thanks for having me on. Um, I guess I always knew I wanted to do game design. I always knew that was the end goal. Um, I think there was a lot of fibbing myself kind of into doing different field work and different lines of work uh, that were more realistic than being an artist. Um, Art was always something that I enjoyed, but I really didn't take it seriously until I got into college. The turning point, I guess, was probably when I took my first drawing class in community college. That was kind of right at the point when I discovered Stout's game design program as well. Um, and then the more I thought about it, the more things kind of started to click that what I really cared about and what I was really interested in was the artistic aspects of games. And then once I kind of realized that I wanted to be an artist, it really was kind of this feeling of liberation. Like I said, like things really clicked, um, and I think that this has been the right choice for me so far. But yeah, that's pretty much
That's
the answer to that
yeah,
question.
that's really cool. You said it was during that one art class, right? And that you took in, you said it was high school.
Oh, it was in community college. I took college college drawing one, and it was the first time I personally took drawing seriously.
Nice. Do you think it had anything to do with like the teacher of that course, or was it more of a personal realization?
Part of it was the professor, because I still remember her, Karen Gustafson. She was incredibly nice, and like any good art professor, she gave each student individual attention and feedback. Um, I remember I did take a high school drawing course, and I didn't like it, and the teacher didn't like me very much because I didn't like the course.
Ah,
Yeah, because part of drawing is building up your skill. A lot of it is more teaching yourself to see things, and a lot of it is attitude, just like anything. I really didn't want to draw still lives when that's like kind of like the nitty gritty of it. Like that's how you practice your skills of observation is just drawing, 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 and I wasn't willing to do that in high school.
yeah. But after a bit more, you kind of realized, hey, maybe this is for me, kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, I think once I actually it was kind of like a happy coincidence because I think I kind of like realized that I'd have to stomach uh, some of the still life stuff if I wanted to get better. But something weird happened when I started drawing still lives. I actually started enjoying it regardless. In fact, like if I had to, you know, change majors, it might just be to studio art.
Oh, nice. So after that, what really do you think's the happiest experience you've had since you really decided you wanted to become an artist?
Um, well, I actually would probably say that it comes. I have the same happy moment with every game I make. Pretty much, there's a moment in development where once the game is actually kind of made and starts taking form, which is like the hardest part, and you get the artwork loaded in the game, and you start to see it take shape. Um, there's always a very satisfying feeling. It's really like exciting. Like when you see the background loaded in or the player sprite loaded in and working, you kind of get like butterflies, kind of like your game is coming together. And that's probably my favorite feeling that I've had as a game artist.
That's actually really cool. I like that. Do you think you could give me some kind of in-depth thoughts on maybe your top three games that have like influenced you, maybe like why they're important to you?
Sure. Going back, I'd say as a kid, um, pretty much the game um, that kind of inspired me was probably it's probably the same as a lot of game designers. It was The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time for the Nintendo 64. Um, there was a lot of different parts of that game um, that really like sparked kind of like the a lot of different creative um, I guess interests. I would always draw floor plans of dungeons and draw out the bosses because as a kid I guess thought it was the coolest and funnest thing ever. I didn't really care like if it was if it was art or if it was story or whatever or just like the design of it. I was so into it. Um, I but that game pretty much consumed my childhood.
That's a
Um,
nice way of putting it.
yeah. Um,
I know I personally have played a little bit of that game. I still need to finish it, by the way. How do you actually feel about the? I think they rebooted it a couple years ago, didn't they? To
yep.
the DS. Did
Yep.
you get any chance of looking at that one? Any of the things they changed in it? Any
I
thoughts
did.
on that?
I did get a chance to toy with it a little bit. Um, and I also played the sequel, which also got like a similar treatment. And I'm personally my opinion of those HD remasters is very high. Mostly because I'm happy that uh, kids these days get to perhaps go through a similar experience that I did. That maybe it will like inspire them like the same way that those games inspired me.
That's really cool. So, first game, Zelda Ocarina of Time.
Yep. I guess backing up, yeah. To me, like it, some for a lot of a lot of my inspiration can be like kind of trailed like directly back to like the main games that inspired me. And Ocarina of Time to me is kind of like the quintessential adventure game.
Kind of
Like
the granddaddy.
it's like the foundation upon which like so much of my taste is founded.
That's really cool. All right, so that's number one. Now, how about number two?
Number two uh, was a game the following generation called Shadow of the Colossus. Um, that was a game that really didn't. Um, it was pretty. Shadow of the Colossus. Um, I guess it's a game that uh, really opened my eyes uh, to what games could be. Um, it was a game that really didn't care much for market trends or I guess for pandering to an audience.
Yeah, I
It
remember
was
myself actually when about that time that game came out. I remember myself. I heard so little about it, and yet I know I had one friend who played it and loaned it to me, and it was an awesome game.
yeah. Shadow of the Colossus was a game that was I've heard like a lot of people kind of like it's kind of one of those divisive games where it's like it's such an artsy game that it emphasizes feeling and the emotion of things over like the technical aspects or like the systems or numbers or anything like that. Um, and a lot of the artistic aspects really take priority over even like the narrative itself. It's more about the experience rather than anything. Um, but I guess that sort of like there was a lot of different elements of that game that really spoke to me, like the loneliness of the game, um, and I guess the exploring a world that was at the time I think bigger than any that I had explored in a video game.
Oh, definitely. I know. Would you say maybe like this game kind of pulled you towards the art side of games compared to like all the computing and other parts that it takes to make a game?
Oh, absolutely. Um, I would say it was another one of those games that seriously drove my taste, and probably my style in the end. Um, I think a lot of like the sort of like decrepit, um, ancient kind of like the blend of organic materials and ruins um, was something that like really I think probably has like recurred in my artwork since I played that game.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, the way it kind of like blend like, and I know like it's impacted um, a lot of game art. Not it's had like a much bigger impact on the industry, I'd say, than just inspiring game design students. But I think it definitely popularized kind of like the sort of I guess architecture mixed with terrain.
That's really
Like
cool. Yeah.
the symbiosis kind of the two.
Yeah, like mixing them all in together to get that nice polished finished product kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, like more so than any other art style.
That's really cool. So we know Zelda Ocarina of Time and we know Shadow of the Colossus.
Yeah.
So what is that final game that kind of pulls at your heartstrings, maybe influence you to really really sell you on gaming as a profession almost?
It was another game that was also kind of a lonely game that I played my senior year in high school, and that was like a period in my life when so much was changing. I pretty much like all my friends I had lost; they were moving away, and it was like the loneliest time of my life for a variety of reasons. And this game, Dark Souls, was something that I just played probably day in and day out for the greater part of a year and a half. I would say honestly, if I had to describe Dark Souls, it would probably be like a darker Zelda without the puzzles, because I feel like a lot of the same appeals, like towards the previous, to apply to this one as well. An open world to explore, kind of like a lonely, melancholy atmosphere. A game that wasn't afraid to try bold things in the name of art.
It's cool. I know.
Yeah.
I'm wondering. I know some people actually have criticized Dark Souls strongly of kind of the insane difficulty that it presents with the player. What kind of is your take on difficulty then in games and such?
Um, I would say I don't know. The difficulty thing is talked about a lot. Um, there's a lot to it. Um, I think Dark Souls is a or, that and also I would say this kind of extends to games sort of maybe even just Japanese games because there's a disconnect between Western audiences and like the Japanese games industry is so different. Um, but I hear like tossed around a lot that it was as hard as it needed to be to um, allow the player to have that genuine feeling of triumph, basically when they finish something. I'd say difficulty um, is kind of it's kind of like uh, a fickle thing in game design because you can only do it if you have a ton of or it can only be done well if your system works well, and if the mechanics of your game serve the difficulty well. Um, like Dark Souls is a game of a lot of rules that it more or less follows uh, extremely well. Um, you know, no matter what challenge it throws at you, with a few exceptions that are pretty noteworthy in the game. Where they were stretched for time, but
Hmm.
yeah.
I know. As far as Dark Souls goes, I actually watched a YouTube video just the other day. It was about it was calling Dark Souls a rhythm game almost because of the pattern that you get into when you're fighting all these enemies. And it seems to always follow a 4-4 time stretch, except for one particularly hard boss in the newest game, Dark Souls 3, that follows a 3-4 time stretch.
Hmm. I think it's interesting that like you bring that up because it also kind of parallels like another topic in game design, which is basically like the strategy of certain things. And I think that the you know the franchise has done a better job with AI and basically how they incorporate randomness into it and still keeping it fair. Um, because you want it to be random enough to keep it interesting, but you don't want it to just be total chaos. Um, and strategy, a lot of strategy comes from memorization of the mechanics and things like that. And I think when the technology was older and um, a lot of like they just didn't really have the resources or the budget to make these incredibly complex fights. Um, but I think what they ended up with was a system that still provides that feeling, even though like it does kind of rely on memorization. It just kind of is it is what it is, and I think the overall experience speaks you know speaks for itself.
Definitely, definitely. Uh, so now that we kind of know why you've gotten all the inspiration that you've had for your games, what are you doing right now?
Well, right now, this is the first semester where every class I'm taking directly pertains to my major in some way. Um, I'm kind of undergoing the jump to 3D art, which is probably the biggest leap that any game artist has to make, just because it's a whole different world. Um, you're using incredibly powerful tools to create just like there's a reason that they wait to throw it at you, just because of how overwhelming it is. Um, but I'm finding a lot of the same skills transfer over into 3D art as well. But I'm also at the same time I am still drawing for all my classes. I'm actually currently in a game design class. I'm making a game with a team. It's explicitly a 2D game that we're making all the art with Photoshop Paint, and Photoshop painting is pretty much like half my life right now. I'm Photoshop painting for almost every class.
Any spoilers on that game?
It's actually going to be kind of an educational game. We're actually making it for a client that our professor had. Um, it's going to be we're making a project for the Chippewa County Historical Society, and where it's going to be we're making the game for the centennial. They're hosting a centennial for the creation of Lake Wissota, the Lake Wissota Dam, and they basically it's like kind of like these old folks who ran this museum basically asked for this thing without um, like it was very clear. It's very clear talking with them that they're like way out of their depth with a lot of this stuff, but they're like, we'd like an interactive experience, please. So we're trying our best to give it to them, and also do something that's worthwhile and interesting.
Do you think being a game artist, you'd ever be interested in maybe making some of those interactive exhibits for like maybe a museum of some sort?
Yeah, yeah. I think you know even if they're not expressly like quote unquote games, um, that there is an artistry to it, and any interactive experience has the potential to be interesting and worthwhile.
That's cool. So I know personally that you're more of a PC gamer compared to console gaming. However, all of the games, I think all of your top three have been on console.
Yeah, they have. I would say I'm not one of those like PC gaming snobs. Um, most of the time, anyways. Um, I made the switch my senior year when I got I spent all my grad money on the PC, the same PC that I'm still using to this day. that I'm thankful I have to 3D model on because 3D modeling requires a lot of processing power.
Oh yeah.
Um, but really, like, um, all the games are the same, and to me, you're like it's really a matter of accessibility and marketing, because that's really like what the big thing is about consoles is it's all marketing, and well, it'll probably come up in more of your questions, like just what like how huge of a role it plays
Hmm.
um, in the industry. Um, I think that like um, I can understand why, like there's a lot of arguments for why um, people purchase a console over a PC. Right now, I think it's mainly accessibility, even though like
Hmm.
really like the markets are so similar. I like uh, I would say like there's hardly the only culture difference I would say it's the way the industry has developed. Games have because they have higher budgets, they're more expensive. There's fewer games coming out, but they're bigger and better than they've ever been before. But at the same time, there's been this, the indie scene has been um, pretty much exploding with how like all the new tools that have come out that have been really easy for people to pick up and learn. And I would say that there's more of a market for that on PC, even though um, I do know that the major, at least Sony has attempted to reach out to a lot of indie devs, but um, as far as experimenting and trying new things, um, I feel like um, the indie games are where it's at.
Are there any indie PC game titles that you'd recommend or that you personally have gotten some inspiration from lately?
Well, every year I think I play like at least one that catches my attention. Um, I would say a game that gave me a lot of inspiration lately that really floored me was this game called Undertale. It was a game made in Game Maker, and I played it my freshman year when I just got done making like my first ever game in college, and like it looked, my first game, like all first games here, like they kind of like look like crap because no one knows what they're doing. People like say like they want to do like pixel art, and like they don't even know what that means. Like it's really just like low res Photoshop art. Like I guess like it looks awful. Um, and I picked up Undertale, and I really thought like, wow, this was a game that looks like it just came off the floor of the Stout Game Expo. like, I was not impressed visually, but I was pretty amazed with how deep the rabbit hole went. And the more I researched and the more I played, the more inspiring I thought it was. Um, and I think like that was probably like the highlight of my winter break was probably playing that one game.
That's really cool. I like that.
Hmm.
Uh, so I know you spend how many hours do you think working on art a week?
Um, well, nowadays I work on art every single night. Um, partially because I wish I could say because I love it, but really it's probably because I have no choice. Um, if I had to throw out a number, I would say at least, you know, probably 15 to 20 hours a week um,
Okay.
outside of class.
Now, do you have like any kind of environment that you like to work in when you're working on art? Like any kind of music you listen to, or do you just work from your dorm?
Well, with a lot of the foundational art courses, you were kind of forced to work in the studio setting, which I didn't mind. Like it was okay. It was isolated, and there's our campus has a pretty nice art building, but now that I've mostly moved to purely digital art, I'm working a lot in my dorm, um, which has a lot of ups and downs. It's easy to get distracted, but um, I think I found myself able to muster the willpower to stay focused. Um, as far as music goes, um, I would say I listen to probably like kind of like this. I wouldn't even say it's a range. I would say sometimes I'm listening to the most extreme, like lose your mind, just extreme metal. Um, it's just it's loud and insane, and I love like just how I guess like emotional and powerful it is. Um, and then I'll also listen to just like the softest, sleepiest, like post rock that's like shoegaze type stuff. Stuff that my friends complain would like to turn it off because it puts them to sleep. Is stuff I have no problem listening to for hours on end.
Do you,
It's usually like kind of like I like you could probably call my music taste bipolar in that sense.
do you think that really like affects your artwork? Like when you're listening to metal versus when you're listening to the softer music, can you like obviously tell the difference between? Does it give you kind of a different art style when you're working on anything?
I don't know if it's as simple as like yeah, like when I listen to metal, like my lines are harsher and I draw more skulls. But I would say, I mean, I know I do take inspiration from music, and I think like a lot of the times I personally will, the feeling of the music or the lyrics will remind me of a scene or something that I'll use for my art. That's probably like it. That's just kind of something that happens naturally. But for work for school, I would say it probably does affect my artwork. Um, I think usually when it's the stuff I don't want to do, I listen to more energetic music to keep me going. Um, I guess I can't really say like what the subconscious effect is. You'd have to like do a study on my work or whatever.
Oh,
I
that'd
don't
be
know if
fun.
it.
What would you say is like your kind of favorite subject for when you're drawing? Like, do you ever do like pure nature stuff or pure architecture stuff and
Well, let's
metals?
see. I do love drawing nature. That's something I found in my studio classes was sort of like that, like drawing landscapes, and especially like quick impressionist renditions of nature are something that I just adore. But as far as like what I kind of do in my spare time outside of that, I usually gravitate towards fantasy. I'm a big fan of my dudes in armor and that type of stuff. Um, yeah, like lots of fantasy, pretty much straight out of those three games. Almost still inspire me to this day. But I have kind of broadened my taste as well. Getting into college, I have to like if like uh, slowly kind of on my career to becoming a professional artist, I have to be able to adapt to different styles and different subjects. But that's pretty much what I do in my spare time is usually fantasy, sometimes some sci-fi stuff to mix it up, but you know.
Ah, that's cool. So, kind of what have you noticed any like industry trends going on in kind of the gaming universe lately?
Let's see. Well, the market trends are usually pretty apparent to me. Um, I know like a lot of more and more big titles are finding it worthwhile to include some kind of downloadable content plan with their games because it's something that's proven to be very successful. Um, and that's something that's kind of like it was unprecedented until like a few years ago. Um, and it's become more and more common for games to be released with season pass because people like they can imagine making a movie and releasing a movie and then like being able to create more scenes from the perspective of like different characters or at different maybe like at different times within the movie and be able to
Hmm.
sell that to people and people would buy it.
That'd be
uh,
kind of interesting. I can imagine even a show like as popular as like Game of Thrones, like imagining some kind of DLC content where you can see everything from the eyes of Joffrey or something.
Yeah, yeah, and people, I think there's a knee-jerk reaction against it because it's not. in some ways it's not it is not really placing the consumer first,
Hmm.
which is kind of the main concern with it.
Because I think
Uh,
it started more in the world of microtransactions on like cell phone games, right?
yep. Yeah. I yeah. I mean the mobile industry is something that I'm super out of touch with. Um, but I would say as far as other trends go, well, I would say like one of the things that sort of drives the industry is games copying other games. Like you can tell like a game is a good idea when there's or it's onto something when there's a bunch of games that follow it that copy it. Um, and I would say right now the main games being copied um, are probably games like Minecraft. I think honestly, Dark Souls is a game that a lot of games have been kind of more or less appropriating elements for their own games.
That's cool. I
Yep.
know I know a game in particular that did that quite well. I think would be Bloodborne. People sometimes refer to it as the spiritual successor of a Dark Souls series.
Yeah. Yeah. I would. I don't know if that exactly uh, counts because it is the same developer, but yeah, I would I would consider cutting that out. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be a sassy asshole.
You're fine.
Okay.
Oh boy. All right. I heard you participated recently in Game Jam as well. That was held at UW Stout. What kind of like an experience was that? What all went on? I don't really know the specifics of it. I just heard that you did it.
Yeah. Yeah, they usually host it once a semester. They have one that's just for our school. Besides, there is one that happens. It's like an international game jam that happens in January. I didn't get to do that one this year, but yeah, last fall I did the game jam on campus. It was my first ever game jam, and it is you basically you get a weekend to make a game. Um, you show up and you can show up with friends, or you can just show up and be like, "Hey, I can kind of draw," like put me on a team. Um, and the way they basically stop people from preparing or coming with work already is there's a theme that you have to follow that your game has to follow.
Ooh.
Um, and I remember our theme for my first game jam was illusion. Um, and I wound up on a team with three friends that I knew. We had a decent sized team with three artists and two programmers.
Oh, that's
And I
good.
think yeah we for some stupid reason you know people listen to me um, with as far with
Well,
things
how
that they
dare
shouldn't have
they?
listened before like with like the scope of the game and there's things I was really happy for, but I think like we ended up basically trying to make a Zelda clone that would be like an adventure game that incorporated like a lot of like these sort of like illusory elements, and we wanted it to just be like uh, kind of just like this like simple silly pixel art game. I did take one of the nights and like I stayed up all night, like writing for the game and making art for the town and stuff. And I was kind of proud with the art I made. I spent like probably half of the entire time just working on the player character,
Oh,
because there's so much that goes into just the player sprite alone in a lot of games. I still notice it in games that I play where like the player is almost always like the most complex thing on screen by far. Um, and I don't think that'll change very often with games that I make. Um, but the game jam, it was a really interesting experience because um, it's the entire game design cycle watered down into just one huge roller coaster over 2 days. Like all the ups and downs, all like the walls that you hit in development that you have to like overcome in no time at all. Uh, and I think like we were actually pretty confident in our product until about like the last 8 hours when it kind of all came crashing down, when we realized kind of that we spread ourselves way too thin, and the artists were, we had so much art that we wanted to include in the game, and our 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 poor programmers weren't um, really they hadn't written their code in a way that they could really mesh it well. So we kind of like have to do like over the shoulder programming, which is something that's kind of unfortunately common until like you learn to use tools like GitHub and things like that, where it becomes easier to share your code. I'm not a programmer, so that type of stuff isn't like super familiar to me, but I can. It's very plain to see like the programmer's process and their distress and their woes,
Oh
um,
man.
especially like they're the ones who kind of make the game happen. So I think our main problem, I learned a lot, pretty much about the main issue with games when you're given such a short time frame is scope. Pretty much understanding the
Mm.
scope of the project, and that should be like your main concern, basically, above all else, is how to make something worthwhile in the scope that you're given. And that's, I think, we got we were a little too deep. There's we you basically, when you have 2 days, you should come up with one idea, and you should just do that one idea and polish it. So like we started with the boss, pretty much. So our game should have been just one boss fight, and it should have just been one good boss fight. But we decided to try to actually make a full-fledged game, which was impossible in 2 days' time.
Yeah, that sounds actually really, really stressful. How much coffee do you think that weekend took you?
Uh, well, funny you bring it up, because I remember being at the mini mart and probably buying like probably like my eighth or ninth cup of coffee. And one of the programmers like looked at me and he was like, "You're going to effing die." Like, um, I consume copious amounts of coffee while I work. That has not changed. It's only gotten worse.
Oh man. Uh, well, it's been great talking to you, Josh. Anything really you got to add? Kind of we wrap up here.
Um, Not that I can think of, except um, I've had an incredibly fulfilling and interesting experience being a game art student at UW Stout. Um, and the future is kind of uncertain for me at this point, but when it comes down to it, I enjoy what I do, um, and I'm happy, working on the skills that I have.
Definitely. Well, thanks so much for your time, Josh.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, this has been Characters and Controllers, everyone. I am again Austin McKay here with Joshua Frederick, and I wish you all a good night or whatever time of day it is.